Welcome back to C&S Corvettes in Sarasota, Florida, everybody. It's Friday, which means it's time for Lyle's Friday podcast. Today we're going to talk about something that everybody's interested in right now, and that would be the current pricing of Corvettes of all different kinds in this crazy bubble world we live in. Between all the things that are going on in the globe, what in the world is happening with Corvette prices? Well, let's get started by saying the same thing is happening to Corvette prices that is happening to every other car price. Due to things like, auto worker strikes, COVID, supply chain issues, chip problems, locusts, floods, whatever. Car prices have all gone up because there aren't a lot of new cars out there. You go by dealer lots, it looks like there's like 4 cars and a couple of tumbleweeds in the lot. As we don't have any new cars that are being sold with great deals and inexpensive financing, 2, 3, 4-year-old used cars have all bumped way up in value because they are what people are buying if they need a car today. That consequently drags up the value of older cars, and everybody moves up and the prices all come up. And now, it used to be not that long ago, if you needed a basic car to get from and to work, nothing exciting, right? Something that had 4 wheels, a seat, and would more or less run enough to get you where you needed to go. You could buy a car like that for $3,500 or $4,500. Those days are gone. That car is now $6,000 to $7,000, and the percentage spread only gets bigger as you move up in the price echelon. How does that pertain to Corvettes, do you ask me? I answer thusly. Let's start with our favorite new car, the C8 Corvette. Probably one of the coolest cars ever built in America. We can all agree on that. Unfortunately, it has also had probably the most difficult birth of any new car that I can remember in the last 50 years, through none of its own fault. So you think about it, the car was coming out in 2019 as a 2020 model, right? Let's think about what happened in 2019. In fall of 2019, you had the UAW auto workers strike. Stop production, shut down the factory until those two parties got together and decided what they were going to do, and then they slowly got back to work. Just about the time March of 2020 rolled around and COVID-19 took over the world, which further slowed production, shut down the factory multiple times. So the cars just weren't coming off the line. And then, due to COVID-19 and a bunch of the travel restrictions and new laws that were put in place, we've had the computer chip supply shortage, and we've had general supply chain shortages of everything. All those ships off the coast of California, all these different things. This has been a butterfly effect of the drastic things we did in this country and around the world to combat COVID-19 in the first 6 to 10 months that it was a reality for us. So then between those things, then add in at the end of 2021, that big tornado went through Kentucky and destroyed pretty much everything at the National Corvette Museum racetrack, heavily damaged the Corvette Museum, and GM just announced a few weeks ago that 128 C8s, brand new, that were in various states of assembly, are all being pulled off the line and crushed because of the water intrusion and dust and debris that made it in as the roof got ripped off and the employee entrance caught fire and all these different things. And they don't want to foist those cars that may be questionable upon the public. Awesome for them. So between all those things, we are just now starting to get back to somewhat availability of parts in somewhat normal working environment. I don't see the C8s coming down anytime soon because they are few and far between. But this I will say, if you are spending $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 above and beyond retail for a C8 because you want one today, which awesome if you can. I wish I was that guy. You know that at some point this bubble is going to burst, and that overage you paid is not going to translate into long-term value for the car because it's going to price correct as the new cars come down to regular retail pricing and are more available. So as long as you don't mind doing that and losing that money eventually for the right to have that car right now, awesome for you. And just keep in mind, as bad as that all is, if you have a friend who is waiting for his new $230,000 Porsche GT3 RS, if you've watched the news, you know it could be a lot worse if you look at this picture. At least your car wasn't on a ship that burned and sank. Moving on to the C7. C7s, 14 through 19, all seem to be bringing, as long as they got 30 to 50,000 miles or less on them, they all seem to be bringing really close, like within spitting distance of what they brought at MSRP new. The Z06s and the Grand Sports are bringing that or more in nice condition right now. Again, just like I said with the C8s, once the C8s become more available and their price drops, just like the lack of ability has drawn up the value of everything, the resumed availability will then, everything will correct downward. So again, if you want one, you're going to pay for it, you're going to have a great time, but you are going to have a price correction in the future. C6s, that's the 2005 to the 2013 cars, are up almost 40% over 2 years ago. Grand Sports in particular are very hot. 2.5 years ago, a nice Grand Sport was bringing, 27, 28 with, 40,000 miles on it, which is about right for here in Florida. Those cars are now bringing 35 to 40 or more, depending on colors and options, for the same car because of scarcity and because, especially during COVID, you couldn't go on vacation. You couldn't go out and do much of anything. What you could do was have a cool car and go for a drive. And a lot of people who wouldn't have bought cars like this did because they had this money and nothing to do with it, and they wanted to have some fun during that time. Of note, the C6 ZR1s, which were hanging around 50, 60 grand 2 years ago, they are now bringing $70,000 to $90,000 or above. The C6 ZR1s are getting to be very hot collectibles in this environment. I don't see those prices correcting downward much because they only made so many of them. C5 Corvettes, that's the 97 to 04 cars, they are up about the same, about 40%. A car that would have brought $12,500 2 years ago is now bringing $17,500, $18,500 today. Same miles, same condition. C5 Z06s in particular, which were selling for around 13, 14, 15, 16, are now bringing anywhere from $24,000 to $32,000 if they're nice and have relatively low miles on them. The C5 Z06, as I've said in many of my other videos, I believe is going to be a very collectible, very desirable car in the future because it's really the last kind of analog car that GM made. The C6 got electronically more complicated and more comforted and more heavy. The C5 Z06 is going to be a car that you want to have 20 years from now, mark my words. C4s, kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing going on with the C4s. The 94, 5, 6 cars in nice shape, not just shiny, but truly mechanically nice, are selling for somewhere from $14,000 to $22,000. Granted, things like Grand Sports are doing way big money, but normal, not special editions, not blah, blah, blah. They're doing 14 to 22, somewhere in there. Those were $12,000 cars 2 years ago. So they have gone up somewhat. The collectability long term, that's going to be your judgment call. I don't have a real feeling for that because I think that the uniqueness of those cars is going to do this as the availability, especially of electronic parts for those cars, is going to do that over time. So see where that ends up. 84 to 89 cars have pretty much remained unchanged as far as pricing goes through all of this. The only interesting thing, and I've talked about this in another video, is a lot of younger buyers, kids in their late teens, early 20s are discovering these cars because they're terribly inexpensive and they're still very competent for going out on an autocross track or the racetrack or whatever. And since they're young, they don't have to obey the rules of, well, you can't change out that seat because that's not original. No, they do whatever they want to do. And so while I don't see the prices going up, I do see a lot more 84 to 89 cars on the road. And that's a good sign for those cars because at least they're not going to the crusher. C2, C3 cars. Here we get into the realm of collectability, okay? So C2, that's 63 to 7 and 68 to 82 cars. Collector quality cars, stuff that is, you know, like really, really nice and is special and restored, whatever. Those cars have been largely unaffected by the price bubble because they were at such a premium already. Since there is no shortage of availability of those cars any more than there normally is, their prices stayed roughly the same. Now, granted, they've still been affected by inflation, but at the same time, they haven't seen a 30 to 40% rise like the cars that people would daily drive have. I think if you keep an eye on those, I'll tell you about that in a second. Let me hit the rough cars. C3s in particular that are rough, you know, like, they are not moving. They're not moving in price, and I don't see a lot of them selling. Here's why. We have the supply chain problems that I talked about earlier, where parts coming from overseas are few and far between right now, and you need those if you're trying to make a rough vintage car nicer. There's also the big problem of there's very few people who specialize in working on those cars left. That's why we are booked out almost 5 months in our little shop here. So between a scarcity of parts and a scarcity of knowledgeable labor to do those cars, and it certainly isn't getting any cheaper to do those cars are kind of sitting for now. They may come back in the future, but this is not the time to be buying a rough 77 Corvette. Don't even consider it unless you, just don't even consider it. Overall, in sum, if you have $80,000 to $110 to spend, my suggestion would be, if you don't want a daily driver, if you want something that you're going to drive on Sundays, feel cool in, and enjoy sparingly, buy yourself a very, very nice collector car from the 60s or 70s. Buy yourself a big block something. Buy yourself a 65 coupe. Buy yourself a 71 LT1. Something that is really nice and has value today, has pedigree, and can expect to go up in the future. Because again, those cars are going to keep creeping up regardless of what happens in the daily driver general traffic bubble that we had discussed earlier. Because for that same amount of money, you could go buy a new C8, right? You know, you can get a new C8 for $110,000 if you're willing to pay that premium over MSRP, which evidently a lot of people are. But as I said, one day that is going to come due. You're going to have to pay the piper at some point for the depreciation, which is going to be drastic over a short period of time once the C8s and the new improved C8s become more available. Food for thought. I appreciate you guys watching. If you have comments or questions, please put them in the comments section below. I always look at all comments and questions, and if I can answer them in a professional and interesting way, I will certainly do so. Other than that, I look forward to hearing from you. Have a great weekend.